Springfield Model 1861. April 12, 1861, Fort Sumter marks the start, and mass mobilization immediately turns standard infantry arm into an industrial emergency. July 21, 1861, at First Bull Run arrives with a mixed bag of smooth bores and conversions, and that shortage is the backdrop for the Springfield Model 1861 becoming the workhorse as production ramps. It is a percussion cap, muzzle-loading rifled musket built to make the Min-E ball do the hard work. A paper cartridge carries powder and projectile. The ramrod seats the bullet. A cap on the nipple lights the charge. The key design move is simplicity. The Model 1861 drops the Maynard tape primer used on the Model 1855, cutting cost and removing a damp weather failure point. Many Sharps infantry rifles cluster around .52 caliber, with a barrel around 30 inches and weight around 9 pounds, often paired with set triggers for a lighter, cleaner break when precision matters. Cavalry carbines shorten the package, commonly seen around .54 caliber with a 22-inch barrel and weight closer to 7 to 8 pounds for saddle carry. New Model 1863 carbines are documented around 39 1/8 inches overall, with practical rates of fire around 8 to 10 shots per minute and an effective range often cited near 500 yards. Pattern 1853 Enfield. Blockade running turned rifles into strategic cargo, and April 25, 1862 matters because the United States capture of New Orleans tightened the Gulf pipeline that the Confederacy had been using to pull in imported arms. A rifle that survives that shipping gauntlet arrives already finished. That is the Enfield's whole advantage. The pattern, 1853. Enfield is a percussion cap, muzzle-loading rifle musket built around a .577 bore and a 39-inch barrel. Overall length sits around 55 inches. Weight lands around 9 1/2 pounds. The standard projectile is a Min-E style expanding bullet in a paper cartridge, and the slow one in .78 rifling twist is tuned for that long, soft lead slug. On paper, the rate of fire still lives around 3 to 4 rounds per minute because a ramrod remains the boss of the workflow. The Enfield shows up in American hands because 1861 to 1865 is a buying war as much as a shooting war. Imports are commonly estimated around 900,000 rifles total, with the Confederacy receiving a large share through blockade running channels. One museum estimate puts Confederate imports at nearly 500,000. Field reality punishes variety. A .577 bore sits close to the United States .58 ecosystem, and that closeness tempts bad ammunition decisions. Fouling plus humidity plus the wrong bullet turns a smooth loading camp rifle into a stubborn fight rifle. The Enfield remains a throughput weapon. A delivered rifle beats a perfect rifle that never reaches the line. Sharps rifle and Sharps carbine. April 12, 1861, marks the ignition point at Fort Sumter, and the Sharps story starts as soon as skirmishing becomes constant and reload time becomes exposure time. Summer 1861, recruiting builds specialist sharpshooter units, and the rifle choice becomes a procurement fight before it becomes a battlefield fact. The mechanism is a falling block breech loader that turns loading into a low, compact motion. Drop the lever, and the block slides down. The chamber opens from the rear. A cartridge goes in. Close the action. Fire. That rhythm stays fast because the body stays down. The see it, believe it detail sits on the block's knife edge. With paper cartridges, closing the action shears the tail and exposes powder so a percussion cap can ignite it. Loading prone becomes realistic. Loading behind a fence rail becomes realistic. That is the real advantage, measured in seconds spent below the enemy's line of sight. January 13th, 1862, locks the contract, and May 8th, 1862 marks the moment Sharps rifles are issued to the 1st and 2nd United States sharpshooters. That is the clean dateline for idea to field. Specs land in a tight band. Many Civil War Sharps cluster around .52 caliber. Rifle barrels often sit around 30 inches with weight around 9 pounds. Carbine barrels commonly trim to about 22 inches with weight around 7 to 8 pounds for saddle carry. United States government purchasing later stacks deep, with one compiled figure listing 80,512 Sharps carbines bought from January 1, 1861 through June 30, 1866. Burnside carbine. Early war cavalry needed speed, while the cartridge era still had gaps big enough to swallow a reload cycle, and the Burnside is a 1861 to 1862 compromise made visible in brass. The signature piece is a tapered, cone-shaped metallic case that still relies on a percussion cap for ignition. The action closes, the gun fires, and the brass case expands to seal the breech. Less gas leakage means steadier pressure and less blowback filth around the action. The trade shows up at extraction. Heat plus black powder fouling can lock that brass in place, turning quick reload into lever force and improvised prying. Specs stay cavalry practical. Most Burnsides are single-shot carbines around .54 caliber with a short barrel in the low 20-inch range. Overall length sits in the high 30-inch class. Weight typically lives around 7 to 8 pounds, heavy enough to feel planted, light enough to ride with. The United States government ordered 55,567 Burnside carbines, and the pattern spreads widely enough to be documented in service across 43 United States cavalry regiments. That is institutional commitment, not collector folklore. Spencer repeating rifle. June 24, 1863 at Hoover's Gap is the kind of event that sells a repeating rifle without speeches. Wilder's Lightning Brigade hits Confederate positions during the Tullahoma campaign, and sustained Spencer fire helps pry open ground that single shots struggle to clear quickly. The battlefield creates demand before bureaucracy creates permission. The mechanism is lever action feeding a 7-round tubular magazine in the buttstock. Cycle the lever and the rifle extracts, cocks, chambers, and locks again. Cartridge handling replaces ramrod handling. The standard military chambering is 56-56 rimfire, and the 56 label signals case dimensions more than a true bullet diameter. August 18, 1863, becomes the political ignition point when Christopher Spencer demonstrates the rifle to Abraham Lincoln at the White House. Ordnance concerns remain practical. Cost per gun, weight on the soldier, and ammunition burn rate that eats wagons and budgets. Logistics is a budget with teeth. September 19, 1863, at Chickamauga adds another hard-use data point. Spencer armed troops hold and delay in broken terrain, where reload lulls usually appear. A repeating rifle removes that lull when supply keeps up. Practical performance is the hook. Contemporary testing and experienced use often cite roughly 14 aimed shots per minute, with higher bursts possible when accuracy standards loosen. The rifle dominates inside the condition set where ammunition stays close and magazines stay fed. Starve that pipeline and the advantage collapses into dead weight. Henry rifle. 1862 puts the Henry into the world as a repeat fire promise with a brass-framed receiver and a long tubular magazine under the barrel. The count is the sales pitch: 15 rounds in the tube and 1 in the chamber for 16 shots before a full reload cycle. The cartridge is .44 Henry rimfire, compact enough to carry in volume and strong enough for close to mid-range work. The mechanism is lever action, and the stress point is loading. The front sleeve rotates, the follower pulls forward, cartridges drop in through the front of the tube, and the follower returns to feed. That process is fast compared to muzzle loading, yet the open tube invites dirt, and the long firing strings invite heat. October 5, 1864 at Allatoona Pass is the clean event stamp for Henry firepower in a fixed fight. Union defenders hold against repeated Confederate assaults, and first-hand accounts describe the psychological effect of sustained repeating fire that refuses to create the expected reload pause. The rifle's reputation grows because a date and a place exist. Standard Henry rifles commonly run a 24-inch barrel, land around 43 inches overall, and weigh about 9 pounds, closer to full rifle carry than saddle carbine carry. Many patterns lack a full wooden forearm, so a heat management becomes a hand problem solved with cloth, gloves, or improvised wrap. Cost and supply keep the Henry rare in official issue, so appearances often track private purchase and unit initiative. Inside the right niche, the rifle bends the first minute of a fight. Outside that niche, ammunition supply turns the volume knob down. Whitworth Rifle. May 9, 1864, at Spotsylvania Courthouse, is the event that keeps the Whitworth name alive in the public imagination. Union General John Sedgwick is killed after dismissing incoming fire, and the death becomes linked in popular telling to a long-range Confederate shot, often labeled Whitworth whether the hardware is proven or not. The bore is hexagonal, meant to fit the projectile for consistent spin, and the twist is often sighted around 1 turn in 20 inches, aggressive for the era. Many examples are described around .451 caliber. That combination can deliver unusual accuracy when conditions cooperate. A scoped package exists in period form, often associated with Davidson pattern optics. The sight adds capability, but it also adds fragility and a training tax. The rifle becomes a specialist tool, not a line infantry solution. Scarcity is the real limiter. The Whitworth is expensive, limited in numbers, and unsupported as a standardized supply item. Plenty of long hits in the war come from ordinary rifled muskets, fired by skilled men under good conditions. The Whitworth remains the precision symbol because the mechanism supports the legend and the legend fills in missing paperwork. Gatling Gun Model 1862. November 4, 1862 is the clean anchor because Richard Gatling's patent lands on that date, and a hand-cranked rotary gun suddenly exists on paper as an industrial weapon. Multiple barrels revolve around a central shaft, and a crank turns human muscle into sustained fire. The internal logic works like a moving assembly line. Each barrel cycles through feed, chamber, fire, and extraction in sequence. Heat spreads across barrels instead of cooking one tube. A stoppage tends to stay local to one position in the rotation, rather than freezing the entire gun. Civil War-era patterns vary, but early models are commonly described around rifle caliber .58, with feed systems based on gravity hoppers. A frequently cited cyclic rate sits around 200 rounds per minute, with real output limited by crew rhythm, hopper discipline, and smoke management in black powder conditions. June 1864 starts the Siege of Petersburg, and that trench environment finally offers a job description that matches sustained fire. Several accounts describe Union Commander Benjamin F. Butler personally purchasing a batch of Gatlings for field use, and limited employment is tied to the Petersburg lines during 1864 to 1865. The key limitation remains the same. A gun that eats ammunition needs an ammunition system built to feed it. The Gatling is a preview of the next war's finance logic. It works when placement, crew, and supply align on the same day. Colt Model 1860 Army. May 1861 matters because the United States Navy orders early Colt 1860 revolvers and issues examples to ships enforcing the blockade, tying the handgun to a specific operational system rather than pure cavalry romance. Early war cavalry culture also treats the revolver as primary arm for mounted shock in many units, especially before carbines fully saturate. The gun is an open-top, cap and ball, single-action revolver built for portable firepower before metallic cartridges clean up the workflow. Specs stay simple and memorable. 6-shot cylinder, 44 caliber, 8-inch barrel, about 14 inches overall, and around 2 pounds 11 ounces. Total production exceeds 200,000, and United States government purchases are listed at no less than 129,730 issued units. Loading is front-to-back labor. Powder and projectile go into each chamber from the front, seated with the loading lever, then percussion caps get pressed onto nipples at the rear. Once loaded, follow-up shots come fast for the era. Reloading under fire remains slow because each chamber demands the full ritual again. The open top frame keeps weight and balance friendly, yet rigidity is lower than later top strap designs. Fouling and heat push that trade-off into view over long strings. Placed in its correct role, the 1860 Army solves sudden, close-range problems with reliable speed. Remington New Model Army. Fall 1861 is the procurement hinge. Samuel Remington goes to Washington offering revolvers at $15 each, undercutting Colt's pricing, and the war's scale forces ordnance to care about unit cost as much as unit performance. By 1863, the new model Army enters the service ecosystem as Colt's hardest competitor. The visual signature is the solid top strap over the cylinder, adding stiffness that helps timing and alignment survive heat, fouling, and rough handling. The system stays cap and ball, 6-shot cylinder, percussion caps at the rear, powder and projectile loaded from the front of each chamber. Specs anchor the carry class. Typical .44 percussion configuration pairs with an 8-inch barrel, about 13 1/4 inches overall, and weight around 2 pounds 13 ounces. The cylinder pin pathway is the practical advantage. Pull the pin and the cylinder comes out cleanly, enabling faster cylinder handling when spare cylinders exist and when hands stay functional. Sales numbers show seriousness. Smithsonian Collection notes describe Remington selling more than 116,000 revolvers across the Model 1861 line into the 1863 New Model Army run. That is industrial presence, not boutique status. A revolver that lives in mud, leather, sweat, and impact benefits from extra frame stiffness more than pretty lines. If this Civil War weapons map helped lock the names to the mechanics, drop a comment with the one gun that surprised the most and the one battlefield moment that deserves a full deep dive next.